Bienvenidos a un capítulo más de Diálogos Sensoriales. En esta ocasión seguimos en la modalidad itinerante y tengo el enorme placer de entrevistar a un gran colega, ya con una gran historia en sensorial. Él es Richard Popper, a quien le damos la bienvenida. Richard, thank you so much for accepting or allowing us to have this talk with you. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Okay, let's start with how did you arrive into sensory? How did you decide that, or in which point you decide, okay, let's work with sensory?
Well, I can give you a little bit of history. I came to sensory through psychology. So
Okay.
I got a graduate degree in experimental psychology,
Hmm.
focusing on psychophysics. Um, I was actually working in the auditory domain, but really my emphasis and interest had to do with scaling, basically how to represent sensation and perception through scaling tasks. And that's was the topic of my dissertation. And uh, at the conclusion of my graduate work, as I was looking at potential avenues for my career development, I connected with uh, Herb Meiselman, who you may know.
Yeah.
Um, he interviewed me, and he still reminds me that I showed up late for the interview. So my advice to any job seekers is try to be on time.
Right.
Um, and the position that he spoke to me about and that I eventually accepted was a position at Natick Labs. And I don't know how well known Natick Labs is, so I'll just describe it briefly. It's a research, development, and engineering center that serves the Department of Defense, the U.S. Department of Defense.
Mhm.
Um, what the work that gets done there is across a range of uh, areas of supporting the military, not with weapons or any kind of, not with weapons in particular or other kinds of combat systems, but with things that have to do with clothing, certain kinds of equipment, shelters, protective gear, and very importantly, the food program is managed by the Natick RD&E Center. And the food program basically is responsible for developing the combat rations, the things that soldiers and mainly soldiers, although it pertains to other branches of the military as well, what they consume during combat.
Okay.
And so I came to Natick Labs with the idea of working on a variety of in a variety of areas related to equipment design and as well as food. And it turned out that my entire career there was pretty much focused on food. And it kind of was the first exposure I had to sensory evaluation, although the emphasis at Natick Labs was very broad. I spent more time really thinking about consumer behavior and consumption, and very little about the kind of sensory evaluation that goes on in industry or in sensory
Mhm.
evaluation departments uh, in food science. So I spent a number of years there, and at one point I had a kind of a sabbatical. I was able to spend several months working in Norway at what at the time was called Matforsk, and it's now Nofima. It's a
Mhm.
food research institute, and that was probably my first in-depth uh, experience of what you might call product development challenges that sensory gets called to help solve. And coming back from that sabbatical, I spent a little bit more time at Natick Labs, but then decided I really wanted to transition to industry. And I took on the task of managing a small sensory team at a beverage company. Uh, ocean spray cranberries. They're quite well established in the US. In fact, I did some research in Mexico to explore appeal of their particular products
Right.
that are based on cranberry, the cranberry fruit. And so that was really that kind of placed me right in the middle of the kinds of challenges that sensory teams experience. And again, there my roles changed. I was managing the sensor group, then I also took on management of the flavor development team. I didn't know that much about flavors, but it was a good blend and responsibility for R&D management. And towards the end, I transitioned to a role in innovation as part of a cross-functional team working with marketing and marketing research and R&D to kind of identify white space opportunities. So it offered me a fairly broad view of product development across the life cycle. And then really, I've had really three jobs in my life, and
Okay.
the third and one that I'm still enjoying is my role as at P&K as a consultant. So I left Ocean Spray to take on a position with P&K Research, a research agency,
Mhm.
and I've been there for 25 years. So I, I went into the detail because I think that the field of sensory evaluation is so broad and people come to it from so many different directions.
Right.
I guess the more typical one would be to come through a food science program um, and learn sensory as part of a graduate program. That was not my path, and yet I think our field is very welcoming to people that come to it from a variety of disciplines.
Right. That's something typical in people who do sensory, at least let's say the first generations or up to the late 90s, because they came from different areas and by chance. I mean, I didn't study sensory and I finished my career doing sensory, for instance, or we have nutritional people or psychologists or food engineering who didn't take that subject at that time on their graduate school
Right.
and now they become like the people who knows and transmit the passion for sensory, right? Who were that person who inspire you, if there is one or several, if you can mention them.
Well, I think that I don't know if there's the one person in particular, but
Mhm.
we learn from various sources, and I think that um, eh, I was certainly inspired by my work um, at Natick, Herb Meiselman, Armand Cardello, that had very broad views of what sensory science and consumer science is about. Um, and we're very supportive of continuing applied research, but also asking fundamental questions about the field. My experience working at Matforsk in Norway was also transformative. I worked with Einar Visvik, but also had a chance to meet and work with Magni Martins and Harold Martins, and they're known for their um, contributions to multivariate analysis. This is when I first really delved into multivariate mapping, PLS in particular,
Mhm.
and it really ignited a passion for that part of the sensory field, statistics and data analysis. And so that was important and transformative. I think that once I joined the beverage company, I found myself kind of a novice when it came to really sort of basic sensory work, which hadn't been my focus at Natick Labs. And I remember the first time I had to, you know, uh, manage a triangle test, and it was like, okay, I better read up on what could go wrong doing a triangle test.
Right.
And sort of during my years there, uh, I benefited from some of the external resources that I was able to engage. And that's where I first interacted with P&K Research. I was actually a client of theirs, and Bev Kroll and Mary Schrade and others at P&K. I certainly learned from them. And so th those were some of the influences. Um, I've also um, while I didn't have a working relationship with them, there are two people I thought I would mention. Uh, Hildegard Heyman, who's been a friend for many years, who's actually uh, on one of your podcast guests, I believe.
Right. Yes.
Uh, so we collaborated on one or two things. We published a paper at some point or a chapter in a book, and she's certainly inspiring. And I didn't know Harry Lawless very well, but Harry had a background in psychology that I tried to emulate some of his thinking and ways he approached sensory evaluation.
Nice. Yes, yes, I agree that there's no one person, but at the end it's like a group of people who is doing the
Exactly.
same thing. So, but
Yeah.
yes, great. Do you? I don't know if you can like say what's the big difference since the first time you start doing sensory and nowadays? Is there a big difference? Is the same? Is quite similar?
Yeah, I think there's a big difference. I think that and it's a great question. The history has been fairly interesting, and I had the opportunity to be a panelist on a workshop at the recent Pangborn meeting in Nantes.
Mhm.
And the subject was how do we define the field of sensory and consumer science? And there's a publication in Food Quality Preference that summarizes and extends on what was covered in that workshop.
Mhm.
And I think the challenge is, how do you define a field? And certainly, if you look back over the history, the field has changed a lot. So probably by the time I got involved, it had already expanded beyond the um, sort of analytical aspects of sensory, so descriptive analysis, difference testing, and more and more uh, consumer research was embraced and brought under the rubric of sensory. I mean, there's still
Right.
kind of a controversy as to, or ambiguity as to whether sensory evaluation does that term include consumer work or not. But people like Howard Moskowitz, and I guess I could have mentioned him as well, back in terms of people that influenced me. I remember meeting him for the first time. We both arrived early at a conference in the UK, and I had not met him before, but if you know Howard, he doesn't
It's
hold
a lovely
back, and so
person.
we spent
Yeah.
many hours till the conference started, having some very entertaining conversations. And so his consumer work and his approach to product optimization was already fairly established. So I, I think that the field continues to broaden, and I think now, in fact, there's a good question as to where do we really draw the line? If the field is sensory and consumer science includes consumer behavior, then what is the boundary? How much do we include uh, studies of consumer behavior that don't necessarily have a sensory aspect to them?
Mhm.
And I think that's something that we in the field can continue to discuss and see if we arrive at some definition that everybody recognizes. I think the role, and it's perhaps a slightly different lens, the role of sensory within corporations has also changed, and it's uh, become a much more uh, uh, I should say, has much more of a seat at the table, to use that phrase,
Mhm,
in
mhm.
terms of how uh, sensory and consumer science, from our vantage point, defined as we do, contributes uniquely to product development. So, yeah, I think there's been a lot of change in the field, absolutely.
Yeah, it is more like I would say inclusive in terms of okay, now let's say sensory is accepting more anthropologists, more like neuroscience or more people from other fields, let's say, or other areas that complement the research,
Yeah,
and
I
that's why you
think that
mentioned.
Yeah, I think that's very true. And I think data science is a good example. I think
Mhm. Right.
a lot of organizations now are struggling with digital transformation.
Mhm.
So you might have somebody working as part of a sensory team whose role is to focus on digitalization and digital transformation. And
Right.
they never do. They never run a descriptive panel. They may not never run a consumer study.
Mhm.
There's, uh, yeah, there's such diversity in roles now within organizations, and consequently also the skill set of the research agencies that support uh, those organizations. And neuroscience is a very good example, that one that you mentioned. Yeah.
Right. What is the best part for you of doing sensory research or consumer research? The best part of doing that.
The best part, I think, is and the one that I just tend in my roles over the years has have been kind of focused as I might say as the front end and the back end. So trying to translate a research question or a business problem into an actual experiment, if you
Mhm.
will, or how do you construct uh, a study that will provide the empirical evidence to address the business question. And there's almost an unending complexity if you
All
consider
right.
some of the many aspects by which you could view any one problem that might come to us. And so, that part is exciting. It's challenging, and I continue to enjoy that. And and I've always been very passionate about the how do you tell the story at the back end, and
Yes.
how do you use statistics, how you use any kind of analytics to kind of extract the insights, and then how do you effectively communicate those. So um, yeah, I mean, those are, uh, uh, I think the other thing that these days I just enjoy looking at these ancillary fields, neuroscience, you mentioned neuroscience, study of emotion, study of, brain function, um, and how does that, what ideas can we draw on? How can we use those disciplines and
Mhm.
those techniques? And we have to be careful, obviously. And there's a lot of opportunity for hype and misapplication, but
Right.
I think that's exciting because I see, a kind of a transformation to continue in the sensory field.
Right. And that let's say experience in the areas of applying sensory. Let's say it's still difficult to speak with clients that sensory really works. I mean, how often you find people that says, nah, sensory is, let's try samples or it's easy, I can do it. So it's nowadays it's common to find companies that think in that way, but not so much as the beginning.
Um, and I would say I don't think that's so much the case, but I don't have a random sample. I mean, the clients that I speak to are speaking to me and P&K Research because they have already uh, uh, consumed the Kool-Aid, if you will. But I think that um, I think there can be a more within large organizations that have embraced sensory and consumer work, there is still a nuanced approach in terms of what questions do you need to research? When is it a management decision? Um, when is, research just, try to avoid research that just is there to justify a decision that's already been made? And so I think that from that perspective, there is some critical thinking about what's really a research question and what's a business question that can be decided on other grounds. Um, I I think that there's probably a diversity of opinion in terms of different parts of, sensory
Right.
evaluation. What is descriptive analysis? Is that critical? Is it nice to have? There are probably differences of opinion there. And I think that in some with small companies, with startups, some of it is a budget constraint. I mean, none
Mhm.
of this is cheap. But I think the mentality, the entrepreneur mentality, is such that someone with a vision thinks they know how to do it and do it right, and that's probably the great way to launch a business and move it forward. Sooner or later, the time will come. They'll need
Right.
us.
Of course. Yeah, you're correct. Uh, do you think there's something you miss from, let's say, old school sensory in the sense of, okay, at the beginning we were doing this in that way, but nowadays we must to do it in this other way? Is there something in that is that the case or not? Not so much.
Well, I think that there's been quite an evolution in terms of how we collect uh, analytical data. So by that I mean sort of profile data from individuals that are trained to
Mhm,
evaluate products. And I think that um, the variety of alternative methods have been proposed and adopted to some extent to try to speed up that process. I think that the fundamentals are still uh, adhered to by and large. And I'm not sure I can think of right now of a example of where, we did it one way back then, and now we totally reject that and do it a different way. But I think that um, uh, perhaps the role of using employee testing programs, I think people have come to realize that the limitations of using uh, the convenience of company employees for predicting consumer
mhm.
or representing consumer opinions. I think that was perhaps um, more common and now is viewed with reasonably justifiable skepticism. Um, but what do you think from your vantage point? What would you say is an
Well,
example of that?
I will say that nowadays people don't take the time to describe the data, to look at the data. They run into the analysis immediately. Go to let's do a NOAA, let's do a PCA. So that time, while we were like capturing the data, looking the data, how we detected an outlier, because at my time I was capturing the data. There
Mhm.
were no fees for competence or in-house developed software,
Mhm.
so we took that time. No, we did that. Let's say pre-analysis data time. But
Mhm.
nowadays, because we everything is so fast, people, some people, I will not say most of the people, but some people don't take that time. So that's something I will always teach to my students. Take the
Yeah,
time,
I think
or
that's a very good point. I think the speed has obviously increased. For one thing, with you mentioned software, and there are software tools now that really facilitate that.
Mhm.
Even the data capture used to be laborious,
Right,
uh, and now it's immediately captured digitally, and a lot of software platforms provide really very good data summaries, and now
Mhm.
even increasingly actually report ready charts and graphs. And I think the other pressure that sensory professionals experience in corporate environments is that internet research has kind
Right,
of raised the bar. I mean, I think that uh, while a lot of what we do can't proceed at the speed of an internet survey, the fact is that everybody's kind of surrounded by research that gets done overnight with a couple of thousand individuals, and the results are due available by the time the last respondent has completed their survey.
right.
We are very careful, to review the data and do some of that um, due diligence that you describe. And so I really I understand why people want to, for example, see data live as it comes in. Myself, I mean, yeah, it's hard not to want to take a peek, right? But it's really you're missing a step, and I think that's your point.
Mhm.
Uh, you're missing a step where you can really take a moment, take a deep breath. Okay, the data are in. What do we see? What do we need to do to if necessary, clean the data or identify, like you said,
Yeah,
outliers. Looking at the distribution. Nobody looks. I shouldn't say nobody, but
yeah,
you
yeah,
know.
yeah. That's right.
Look.
I do the same.
Yeah, so I'm with you there.
Yeah, in fact it did for the outliers. There are some. Well, I analyzed this data sometime before. The group of outliers, it was in fact a cluster. So without doing a cluster, it was like, okay, that amount of people are saying something entirely different. So they didn't. They are not part of your sample. So that's something you can
Yeah.
detect
You
on
know,
the.
it reminds me of somebody else that had a good deal of influence on me is Hal McPhee,
Oh,
since
sure.
retired.
Yes, yes.
And but I remember he would often make exactly your point about there's a 20% of your sample are, he would call them dead tongues. Uh,
Uh,
and maybe that's a cluster that you want to identify and remove from your analysis, or at least at one stage, depending on the objective. A lot of times
right.
the answer to so many of these questions is it
It
depends.
depends. I totally
Uh,
agree.
but um, but you do need to take the time to consider the it depends options. So yeah.
Yes. Great. Okay, let's move for two EFC questions. No ties allowed, please. So just let me know which one do you prefer.
Okay.
Red wine or white wine? Wine.
Red.
Tetrad testing or triangle test?
I'm sorry, what was the first option?
Tetrad? Tetrad test?
Yeah, tetrad or triangle.
Correct.
I, you know, I don't get too passionate about the choices here. I think that I know the arguments about statistical power, but I'm still okay with the triangle test.
Okay. Chicago Bears or White Sox?
I'm not going to go there.
Okay. Traditional descriptive analysis or rapid methods?
I think I think there's a place for both. I think that what um, I guess I would land on the side of traditional because I think the true power of the methodology is is most evident when you take the when you go deep.
Right.
But I understand, of course, that time and resource limitations, in addition to time, force you into other directions. And there has been a lot of um, evolution of these rapid methods. So I think they work, but I think that the 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 holy grail, if you will, the true benchmark is still the traditional.
Right. Chicago style burger or hot dog? Chicago style, of course.
Yeah, I love those hot dogs.
Analytical or consumer testing?
Well, as you can imagine, my background and my development in the field, consumer for sure. I think that's to me that's what I will put my bet on every time is what does the consumer think?
Okay, thanks. Parametric or non-parametric statistics?
Um, I think that we do well with parametric. I think there's concerns, of course, about and there's some questions that are truly only uh, uh, appropriately analyzed with non-parametric techniques. But um, I think that many times for example, you can make a lot of progress by with ANOVA, even though some of the assumptions could or we know are in fact violated, but it's still it's very robust. So parametrics.
Yes, that's interesting. Okay, preference
I
mapping
think you
or
disagree with that.
no, no, no. But that's something that happens. Every time I see an ANOVA and I ask, okay, did you test your distribution? They tell me, or the answer is most of the times is no. Why? So that kind of stuff you mentioned, those assumes are sometimes dangerous, right? It's like okay, it's a I learned it in that way, so I should do it in that way. So that time that of trying to do more research or understanding more the fundamentals of the thing because of the times of everything is getting faster. So
Yeah.
people is not taking that time to learn more of the fundamentals. So that's something that's why I smile because you are right. Sometimes we do not care about the assumptions. Let's say.
Yeah, I think so perhaps I would recast your dichotomy or your alternative parametric versus non-parametric with, what is it that we want, what is it that we want to learn from our data? So if you look at the distribution of 9-point liking ratings, most of the time the distribution is very skewed. It's
Right.
bounded at the upper end.
Mhm.
Uh, you've got a lot of most of the products that we do research on are reasonably good to begin with, right? So you get a lot of scores at the high end, and you sort of say, well, how good is the mean as a representation? And what is it that you really want to what is it that you really want to extract from the data? Sure, the mean is it's it's one way of measuring the central tendency, but is that the most meaningful? So is it more
Mhm.
meaningful to look at, how many people rated it top two or top three box? Maybe it's more meaningful to look at that and the number of people that rated it at the bottom.
Right.
I mean, the idea that we have continuous scales, when you look at how people use scales, they're not really used in a continuous fashion. So I think the reliance, and I'm sure this is not news to anybody, but perhaps a good reminder is that thinking about what do you want to extract from the data that's going to answer the research question and the business problem. And
Mhm.
sometimes it's not the immediate kind of typical approach might not be, or might not be the best way to represent your findings. You might
Right.
want to look at it differently.
Correct. Yes. Yes. Totally agree. Okay. Two more questions. 9 point or 7 points hedonic scale.
I don't care.
Okay.
I mean, this is heresy, right? I mean, given that I work for P&K Research and David Perriam helped develop the 9 point hedonic scale, is that, and it is the scale that's, I think, most widely used.
Mhm.
Uh, but um, I think that a scale is a scale is a scale. And, we've looked at 7 point and 9 point ratings on a respondent level across many, many studies when that question came up, which is better? And you can really arrive at the same learning with either one. So, there's just I have not seen any empirical evidence that says that one scale is uh, better than the other.
Performing. Yeah. Okay.
I like
Thank you.
9 point because I'm used to it, but
Uh-huh.
if somebody, I think the critical thing really is that it's good for an organization, at least a company that is in the product development business, to have some consistency.
Mhm.
So if you're used to a 7 point scale, if the history of that company's product research is based on a 7 point scale, I would stick with that because there's more value to being able to compare results across time than there is in, some debate on and decision as to, whether the 9 point is better than the seven or vice versa.
Right.
So building a database is one of the key tools in helping make good decisions based on your data. So consistency is important for that reason.
Right. Agree. Uh, Preference mapping or PLS?
Um, I I came to this whole area from a PLS vantage point.
Mhm.
So it's been the way I think about this analytical challenge, and so yeah, PLS. And that's
Okay.
the I think that uh, again, I don't know that there is that big a difference. So if you were to compare PLS versus principal component regression, so where you just basically extract the factors and that's basically a preference mapping. I think that's what you mean by preference mapping then. I think the added gain from PLS is probably I'm probably exaggerating it in my mind because it's just the framework that I've become used to. But um, many cases, there's a strong signal in the data, and I think that a number of different approaches hopefully will lead to the same outcome. Now, I do think that there are some emerging techniques based on machine learning
Mhm.
that will introduce new methods that may be um, more powerful than either one of preference mapping or PLS. But the challenge there is often those methods require a lot of data to be stable. So we'll see.
Okay. Yes. Thank you. Thank you for your answers. Speaking about that, what do you think about the use of artificial intelligence in sensory? Is well received,
Well,
no?
yeah, sure. I mean, you depending on how you define artificial intelligence,
Okay.
you could say we've been using intelligence for decades, right? You could
Yes.
say PCA is machine learning, right? So there you go. Um, and again, I think that you sort of have to break it down into what aspect of AI are you really thinking about? So can AI I think it's got huge potential for summarizing text data. I think the idea of doing qualitative research uh, uh, with sort of open narrative input from consumers at a scale that you used to, or that we do quantitative studies at, it used to be unimaginable. I mean, if you had 200 people giving you, multiple observations in multiple responses in an open-ended fashion, how would you begin to summarize that? You'd spend hours, days, weeks
Mhm.
reading through comments, trying to, and even with the facility of word clouds, it's not really efficient. So I think AI's the large language models as a way of extracting and summarizing information it's already happening, and I think will continue to offer us some great opportunities to use qualitative research. I think chatbots is another example of and a lot of times in our quantitative surveys we ask an open-ended question. The answer we get could be perhaps sparse, we don't get a lot. What do you like? The flavor. So a chatbot uh, can can probe and probe intelligently. So I think that's also a technology that exists now and is being used now. We're using it. Yeah, I think those aspects of AI. Um, and then I think that there's probably in some automation areas also great potential. Um, I think in the field in general, in the public domain, I mean, when people talk about AI, I think there's a lot of hype. Large language models definitely have limitations, and we'll just continue to learn about those. But in some of the areas that I mentioned, I think it's solid, and yeah, I would embrace it.
Yeah, yeah, it's something that
Do
it's
you
already
agree?
here. Totally, totally. It will not replace, but because as you mentioned, it requires a lot of data. You need to understand your objective or to plan your design and etc. That is something you need to do.
Yeah.
It is not possible to nowadays. I don't know in the future, but it's not possible to rely all on the artificial intelligence on a predicting model of the sensory characteristics for an well accepted product, in my opinion. But it's something we as you mentioned, we can use for root, something that is a routine. Okay, let's do that thing or analyze the comment, the open-ended questions, which is something awful. I agree and and that's that we need to embrace it. We need to know how to use it as well because it's like something like a taboo as well for some people. I don't know, I don't want to do artificial intelligence. It's already, as you mentioned, we
Well,
have.
yeah, and I think that I think a lot of companies are really embracing it. And so for a sensory and consumer scientist to sort of say, no, I don't want part of that, they're going to be left behind. because the digital transformation happening in the corporate world is just it's a wave that is just going to carry everybody along, or those that don't
Mhm.
will be left behind. So we need to embrace it.
Right. Thank you. Okay, we're arriving at the end of the interview, Richard. So I have two more, maybe three questions.
Sure.
What will be in your opinion, of course, the minimum skills of a people who will be sensory scientists? I'm speaking about background or methodologies or I don't know behavior. Is there something at least like a starting pack?
Well, I think, and you alluded to this as well earlier. I think that uh, being grounded in the in the fundamentals is important. I think that um, knowing how to execute a test or a method is not really enough. Uh, I think that it's important to, excuse me, understand the research methodology at a more fundamental level and some of the science behind it. So I think understanding the psychology of scaling, understanding the sensory systems,
Mhm.
uh, some of the physiology. That's something that I feel that I probably always had a bit of a blind spot about, but I think that's fundamental as well. And and then what constitutes rigorous and sound data analysis. I think that so the psychology underlying sensation and perception and consumer and psychophysics and consumer responses, understanding the sensory systems and data analysis, those three areas to various extent. No one is going to be deep in every one of them, but to be well-rounded, I think an education needs to strengthen and develop an emerging professional in all of those areas.
If you receive a candidate with all those, all the majority, because it's not possible if there's a new fresh people, but with those fundamentals and other that has not those fundamentals but has experience, which one will be the? I know there are other employees. No, we need to talk with that person, but what do you prefer? Somebody who has a very good knowledge or experience? Even that person has no background of sensory, let's say.
Well, it's of course a complicated question because if you have no background in sensory, I would be concerned about their them finding that job fulfilling. And so I think having the experience increases the odds greatly that they will enjoy and flourish in the
Mhm.
role
Right.
uh, that they're being considered for. However, I put a lot of emphasis on the background and the academic um, experience and education
Mhm.
because I
Okay.
think that really equips you to learn and it just um, it, there's no there's no obvious limit to where somebody can go if they really have the fundamental understanding.
Mhm,
Uh,
mhm.
uh, I think there's a tendency for, and I think we all do this, and we have to make hiring decisions. It's easy to find the person, or it's easy to choose the person who's done exactly what you want the person to
Mhm.
do.
Okay.
That's yeah, and I think sometimes we need to look beyond what they have done
Mhm.
and say, what do they have the potential to do? And that potential is greatly increased based on, the foundations of their education.
Right. Okay. Let's say you have a time machine and you can go back to the past at the exact
Back in
moment.
time or forward?
Yes.
Which way
No,
do
no,
you
back
look?
into forward will be interesting. Okay. Well, now we can speak to our future person. I don't know, maybe 5 years later, we can see these and analyze the comment. But no, but traveling back to the past, and you had the opportunity to speak with Richard just the time before he will accept to do this sensory job. Do you have something to tell him?
Yeah, let's see. Hmm, what would I say? I mean, I guess I've been happy with my career. So, I would, that's the positive part. I think that um, I would, from what I guess, thinking about myself, what I would advise Richard is um, change roles more often than my history suggests that I did. And so I think that's the job market today anyway, is people move more rapidly. And I think that there's a lot of learning from different environments and different people. I think I benefited from that, but I probably could have um, accelerated that. And the other part is, because I ended up on the commercial side rather than the academic side, I would say, Richard, learn more about the fundamentals of business. Make understanding the fundamentals of a business, and how a business evaluates its financials. Make that as much, maybe not as much as a priority, but a definite priority in your development. So understanding the business, yeah.
Nice. Okay. We are almost done, Richard. Then, do you have a sensory book or paper poster that you want to share with the people who is watching at us, in order to they can uh, go in deep into particular field of sensory?
Well, I think so. Thinking back to, I think I mentioned to you when I first joined the beverage industry from a more of a, research role at Natick Labs. Uh, eh, there was a book that I turned to because I really needed something along the lines of how to, and it's the Mealgard Seville Carr uh, textbook. Now I think in its sixth edition, and I respect how they've continued to evolve that book with keeping it up to date. And um, I think because of my own perspective on the field, I've always liked the writings of Harry Lawless, and Harry Lawless and Hildegard Heyman
Mhm.
wrote a textbook that is very thoughtful, addresses the how-tos, but in a way that's provides a lot of the sort of fundamentals that we were talking about. And Harry Lawless has written a book also called Quantitative Sensory Evaluation, I think, and where he really, really connects the contemporary techniques in sensory and consumer science with some of their fundamentals in psychology. So, and I think other than that, is reading the journals. I mean, Journal of Sensory Studies and Food Quality and Preference. And I've always gotten inspiration from conferences. So, I just try to, I get the impression that, once you're in the day-to-day of doing sensory work, maybe people don't read as much as they might benefit from. I think we all fall prey to that. Who's got time to read this 15-page journal article? But yeah, keeping up with that. So not anything in particular, but just try to benefit from these all these sources of inspiration.
Okay. Thank you so much, Richard. I want to thank you again for accepting this time. And well, see you maybe in the next conference. Maybe Pangborn
That
is
would
the
be
next, I
great.
guess. So,
Uh, was that Pangborn? In
in Philadelphia, I guess. Yes.
I know.
Okay. So eat some Phillies
Go
and
Philadelphia.
yeah. Thank you. Thank you. It was
Thank
really nice to
you.
speak
Thank
with
you very
you.
much. Appreciate it. And glad to be part of your program.
Thank you. Muchas gracias, Richard. Nos vemos en la siguiente emisión de Diálogos Sensoriales. Si les gustó, denle like. Si no, simplemente no digan nada. Hasta luego. Chao, chao.